Hello, students of AP Bio. Here's our presentation for Chapter 4. Good news is this will be a lot shorter than Chapter 3. So keep that in mind. That'll be good for everybody involved, I think. All right. So far, we talked about water. Chapter 3 was all about water. Hopefully, I know that you feel pretty good about the properties of water. And if you don't, you should probably go back and do some studying up on those. Those are very important for AP Biology. So, what else are you made up of, or life is made up of, other than water? Okay, so just think about that for a second. And you've probably noticed that I have these letters up on the board or on your presentation here. Well, these are what we would call the elements of life. So most of you could probably come up with these, but in case you can't, how we remember these is CHOMPS. So this is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And what we would say is those are the major elements of life. Now, are there some other ones involved? Absolutely, there's more involved. But for the most part, those are kind of the biggies. So the ones that you should probably know. And if I ever ask you what are the elements of life, just think CHOMPS. And then if you can just remember what the letters mean, that is great. I would probably write this down somewhere. Okay. So moving forward, Chapter 4 is all about carbon chemistry. And then Chapter 5 will look at the macromolecules. All of those are mostly built on carbon. So this kind of leads into Chapter 5 pretty nicely. But Chapter 4 is really short. Carbon is the backbone of biological molecules, which are, if we ever see that term, organic molecules or biological molecules, you should think macromolecules. Things like carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. And all organisms are made up of mostly carbon and some water. So our organic chemistry, which is, if you take any science field in college, you'll probably have to take organic chemistry, which can be a challenge. It was for me. But it's basically the study of carbon compounds. And carbon atoms are very diverse, and that's probably the main reason that life is made mostly out of it, because it's so diverse. It can create anything from as simple as carbon dioxide or methane, which is CH4, to something as complex as the protein like hemoglobin, for instance, which carries oxygen throughout your bloodstream. Okay, so we can have something extremely simple from carbon, but we can also get extremely complex. So, and carbon is so diverse because it has the ability to create single, double, triple, and even a quadruple bond. And the reason why is because because of its valence electrons. Carbon has what we would call 4 valence electrons. It wants to get up to that 8, so it can make 4 bonding sites. So these are just a couple examples of this. And carbon dioxide, again, carbon molecule, it's the source of carbon for all organisms. Where does that happen? Well, it would happen in a plant. Plant would use carbon dioxide, and then we as consumers would consume those plants or something else that ate the plant. Okay, but because of carbon's versatility, it can build vast varieties of organic molecules, all kinds of different things. And we'll get into those in both this chapter a little bit, and mostly in Chapter 5. So again, I mentioned that carbon's electron configuration is really what allows it to be so diverse. It can create those 4 bonds, and if I just point those out, here's carbon over here. 1, 2, 3, 4 valence electrons, creating 4 bonding sites because it wants to get up to that full octet of 8. So hopefully you learned about that in chemistry, but if not, there's your brief review. Carbon may bond to itself, forming what we would call a carbon chain, and you'll see that below. Carbon bonding to carbon and then ethane upper left, You have propane, again, 3 carbons, and then you can just see there's multiple carbons that can be bonded together. Those are what we would call carbon skeletons, and we call it the skeleton because it's kind of like the backbone, right? The heart of where that molecule is, and everything else branches off of that carbon. So that's why we call it a carbon backbone. But they can vary in length and shape, very much so. I just want to explain one thing with that. If you look at these 2 molecules here, they look pretty different, right? But in reality, that is the exact same molecule. It's just 2 different ways to represent that. Okay, so the one on the right is actually how you would see this most of the time in science. And in biology, what you're going to have to learn is that at each of these points, there is a carbon. So carbon, carbon at each of the points. Okay? And everything else, unless it's said to you what it is hydrogens coming off of there. Okay, so you can see in the title it's called hydrocarbons. All right, there's a reason for that because most of this molecule is carbon and hydrogen. Now, like I said, if it's not hydrogen, they have to tell you what it is. So you can see here we have a double bonded oxygen, again, another oxygen, OH group there. Okay, so if it's not hydrogen, you can assume that they would tell you. But if it is hydrogen, they don't necessarily have to. So remember, carbon has 4 bonding sites. 2 of these, if we look at this carbon right here right now, 2 of those bonding sites are taken up by the other carbons they're linked to, which would be this carbon here and this carbon there, right? But what else is there? Well, it has to be bonded to a hydrogen and another hydrogen because you have to fill those 4 bonding sites. So all of these other carbons will be filled with all those hydrogens to fill up their 4 bonding sites. A little bit different. Right here is what we have, a double bond. So because there's 2 bonds between those carbons, now there's only room for 1 hydrogen and 1 hydrogen. Okay. So keep in mind that, again, they had to tell us that there was a double bond. That's why there's 2 lines were there. Let me erase what I have. There's 2 lines there, right? That's denoting the double bond, and that is just showing that another bonding site is being used. But just keep in mind that each one of those points needs to be a carbon, and then if it doesn't tell you what's bonded to the carbon, it has to be a hydrogen. So again, just remember that. Pretty important, because you probably will see you might not see it all the time, but you will see that relatively often in biology. So examples of hydrogens, fat molecules. We'll look at lipids in chapter 5. That would be an example of hydrocarbons. And if I just bring this up, the hydrocarbon portion of this molecule would be these guys right here. So the black would be the carbon and then the hydrogens coming off of there. Okay, the reds up here, there's some oxygen in there, but these portions down here are all hydrocarbons. Okay, so hydrocarbons are just consisting of carbon and hydrogen, and one thing to note about them is they're nonpolar. So when we look at fats, for instance, or adipose cells are fat cells in your body. So again, they are nonpolar, meaning they do not mix with water. Okay. The picture on the left is actually a picture of what we would call a triglyceride, which is, again, a fat molecule. Okay, so moving on. Isomers. Isomers are molecules that simply have the same molecular formula, but different structures. So we show you some pictures of there, and it will make sense. The first one is called a structural isomer, which means same formula, different arrangement. And if we look down here at the picture, we have a straight line one, and then we have a branched one. Okay, so again, same formula for both of those, but we have a branched versus a straight line. We look at geometric ones. Again, you can see the two carbons in the middle, but you can see these X groups or the variable groups that are attached to there just flipped. Okay, so again, geometric isomers, still same formula, just a little bit different arrangement. Interestingly, on a geometric isomer, this is actually what allows for vision in your eyes by changing rhodopsin in the retina of your eye to a different geometric isomer. That's what allows for your vision. So, interesting fact there. And then the last one is an enantiomer, which again, it's still an isomer, so same molecular formula, different structure. And in an enantiomer, we think of mirror images. So if you look at the hand at the bottom, they're showing you that because it's a mirror image of each other. And enantiomers have interesting anatomical properties. So I'll just go through a couple examples of that on this last slide. Okay, so enantiomers are very important to the pharmaceutical industry. Again, subtle differences can have huge significance. In this case, we have L-DOPA and D-DOPA. So the one on the right, D-DOPA, is biologically inactive. But when we have the one on the left, it is effective in treating and against Parkinson's disease. So in the pharmaceutical industry, L-DOPA is really effective. And even though it's the same formula, mirror image of it, D-DOPA means absolutely nothing. And then I'm just going to show you this video. It's just like 2 minutes long, interesting video on another form of an enantiomer. So hopefully this works.
Hi, this is Ever from Minute Earth, and this is the chemical formula for the active ingredient in a common over-the-counter nasal decongestant. And this is the chemical formula for an extremely dangerous street drug. They have the same boiling point, the same molecular mass, and are made up of the exact same elements in almost the exact same structure. These two chemicals are mirror images known as enantiomers. They are sort of like your left and right hands. If your right hand was evil, and for the same reason your right hand only fits into a right-handed glove, and your left hand only fits into a left-handed glove, each enantiomer fits only into its corresponding receptor. When the receptors for the nasal spray molecules are activated, they send out a neurotransmission that helps open the nasal passages. But when the receptors for the street drug molecules get filled, the resulting neurotransmissions cause a spurt of euphoria and aphrodisia in the near term, and addiction and brain damage in the long term. Thousands of other molecules also have left and right-handed versions. Right-handed pilicinamine binds to toxic heavy metals in the bloodstream and lets you pee them out. On the other hand, left-handed pilicinamine is incredibly toxic itself since it blocks the body's ability to use vitamin B6 and causes your brain to malfunction. Left-handed Carvone makes things smell like mint. Right-handed Carvone makes things smell like licorice. Despite mirror molecules' incredibly similar structures, you can't just easily convert one into the other. To turn nasal spray into meth, you'd need to first break its very strong covalent bonds, and that requires dangerous reagents and expensive high-pressure lab equipment. But the dark corners of the internet are filled with descriptions of people trying and miserably failing to get meth and its resulting high from nasal sprays. Companies that produce those sprays have even changed the name of the active ingredient on the package to try to discourage these would-be Walter Whites who can't get their chemistry right.
All right, so that's it for chapter 4. And I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. And hopefully you got it.